Good evening, students. So this session, we are going to first of all begin finishing with the applications of somatotyping. In the last session, we briefly talked about somatotyping and various types and methods of somatotyping, including, of course, we talked about Hippocrates and as well as the Viola method, Greshma's method, and most importantly, as I mentioned to you, Sheldon method and Heath-Carter method are very important in the exam point of view, right? So briefly, what are these methods and how are they performed? How did they classified different body types, for example? Okay, and specific methods, specific measurements that they have taken, and what are the issues with respect to it. But what are the uses or applications of somatotyping in the first place? Okay, let's have a look at that. So uses of somatotyping, knowing the body type or knowing that people in a given population can be fit into at this proportion into either endomorphic nature or mesomorphic nature or ectomorphic nature or any of these body sizes. What type of use or benefit they provide? First of all, to understand growth, so different aspects of growth, exercise, performance, and nutrition. So how body size is changing. Let's say body size changes that we kind of talked about and we're going to talk about in the unit 12 part, where we are going to deal with how with age, with the nutritional components, with certain variables, how our body changes, how our growth change. So somatotyping, knowing the body type and in correlation with the age or in correlation with the specific population and what do they eat in general. So it provides us an idea about various components like variability with respect to the nutrition and performance, how they perform with respect to the somatotyping as a type of body. We'll talk about that in different sports. Exercise, what is the connection to the exercise and the body type, and also a general pattern of growth can be learned from somatotyping. And disease susceptibility. I was telling you initially, Hippocrates, the theory that we talked about, people were categorized based on whether they're susceptible to something like TB or less susceptible to, or susceptible to cardiovascular problems. So definitely there is a connection. If people are undernourished, it shows or reflects on the body type, and which in turn talks about their vulnerability to disease. So people who are endomorphic in nature, who have more fat, they tend to have higher risk factor towards the cardiovascular problems. Whereas people who are really thin, lean, probably have proper not no proper nourishment, they are more prone to infectious diseases like TB. Okay, right. Disease susceptibility can also be learned or connected through somatotyping process. Then clothing industry can improve traditional sizing systems by means of reference to the structure and function of the human body. So clothing industry. So what about in the clothing industry? The clothing industry or textile industry, they can actually utilize the sizing, how sizing was previously done. They can change it as per the current trend, current body type in a given population. So to satisfy the requirements of the trend in that, they can actually design or redesign the sizes, redefine the sizes. So where do that knowledge comes from? By taking measurements and by classifying people into different somatotypes, thereby knowing what are the size requirements of the given population. Next, common use facilities design. So like in the process of designing common areas, like for example, seating areas, either you talk about movie theaters, stadiums, what should be the size, average size of the seat, for example. Gym equipment, like depending on the dimensions, you need to design how and the length between different equipment and the width between or the gap between two arms. So these dimensions are very important in designing gym equipment. We'll partly see this in the unit 12 part, applications of anthropology. Okay, I'll tell you a little bit of specifics there, but otherwise in general, knowing the body type would help us in designing seating areas, gym equipment, traveling equipment, lots of places, common places where there is no fixed person uses it, but individuals with average sizes may use it. So having the knowledge of somatotyping is greatly helpful to this. The next part is selection of a sport. So is it actually useful? Think about it, somatotyping. Can we actually suggest someone or guide someone based on their body type into a sport? In general, you may say yes. But how far is this somatotyping useful for that? So I don't think it is completely reliable to utilize somatotyping in selection of athletes, but definitely it can help us filter, like spotting the potential athletes for classifying for physical education activities. spotting the potential. So this person with this body type may have higher potential to succeed in so and so sports. Again, we'll talk about an applications of anthropology. So there will be discuss about the sports and anthropometry in sports. There we'll talk about certain body types are better fit to certain sports. Like swimmers, for example, need to have certain amount of abdominal fat, for example. So type of muscle that they need. So definitely somatotyping can help preliminarily in choosing the or in spotting individuals who are better fit to a specific sport. So that is one application that I think we cannot deny its use. Okay, and also studies point out that somatotype distributions of athletes for all sports in 19, this is an old study, 1968 and 1976 Olympics, when they looked at the somatotyping of athletes who participated in the Olympics at that time, that majority of the males was dominantly mesomorphic, neither ecto or endo, but the mesomorphics were more common, more dominant in those sports, and were also less ectomorphic than females. So females are more ectomorphic or more thinner than the males. So this is a general observation. Over a period of time, when we collect data like that on somatotyping, it would provide us who would succeed better in these type of sports. Okay, right. So next, what else? The study of physics has important role to play in understanding the growth. So body type. So growth is there's a direct connection, even maturation and performance. Okay, so development aspects of the body. So size-wise variation that you can notice, or population-wise variation you can notice, and also as I mentioned to you, their performance can also be defined by that. And interestingly, some ethnic studies have shown an approximate idea about a given population and what body type do they fit into. So we can also use this information to maybe identify different ethnic groups based on their body type. So there's some information on this. Studies revealed that Eskimos from Alaska, people living in the polar regions like Alaska, they're primarily endo to mesomorphic in nature. Endo, more body fat, the requirement for sustaining in the cold environments, and mesomorphic, endo to mesomorphic there. And like that, Manus in Papua New Guinea near Australia, the island in near Australia, ethnic groups from Manus and Kaingang, either spelled as Caingang or Kangang. These are, kind of natives of Brazil region. These people, these three categories, two categories, sorry, Manus and Kaingang, they are more mesomorphic in nature. So Eskimos more endo to mesomorphic. Okay, Kaingang and Manus are more mesomorphic, and Nilotes of Nile Valley in Africa, they are extremely ectomorphic. Like that, even ethnic groups can be identified with their somatotype. But of course, this provides an average picture. Okay, right, like that, somatotyping may have different applications or different uses as I mentioned to you here, starting from understanding the various aspects of growth, exercise, performance, and nutrition, disease susceptibility we talked about, and helping in defining or redefining the sizes for textile industry, for designing clothes, and for utilizing common facilities, and also for spotting individuals who have better potential in performing well in a given sport. Okay, and also even some ethnic differences. So these are some advantages or importance or uses of somatotype. With that, we finished talking about unit 11, sorry, unit 10. Now we are moving on to the next unit, that is unit 11. Okay, and in the exams, I think we have seen the questions are being asked on somatotyping, and mainly Sheldon somatotyping has been asked. So be familiar about the study Heath Carter as well as Sheldon method of somatotyping from this part for the exam. Right. So next I would like to move on to next unit, that is unit 11. So this unit is fertility. It is to do with the fertility. Okay, and there are three sections to this. First section asks about relevance of menarche, menopause, and other bio events to fertility. Relevance of menarche, menopause, and other bio events to fertility. And fertility patterns and differentials is the first section. Second one is demographic theories, biological, social, and cultural theories of demography. And 11.3 deals with biological and socio-ecological factors influencing fecundity, fertility, natality, and mortality. Okay, we'll discuss these things first. 11.1 we'll go with. So relevance of menarche, menopause. So basically we're going to learn about menarche, menopause, and the connection to fertility. Okay, I would like to begin this discussion with the definition of fertility and fecundity. Definition on fertility and fecundity. So what does it mean by how do you define fertility? So what does fertility refers to? Okay, and also I'll compare briefly here fertility with fecundity, because in the coming chapters in 11.3 for example we need to discuss about fecundity. So I would like to give a brief comparison between fecundity and fertility by definition now, and we'll continue with the concept of menarche, menopause, and many associated events there. Then we'll come back to the comparison, more thorough comparison on fertility and fecundity concepts. So fecundity in biology or in biological terms, it is the capacity of women to have children. Fecundity is capacity of women to have children. Capacity of women to have children, or physiological capacity of women to reproduce and have children. How is it different from fertility? Fertility is performance. Fecundity is capability. Fertility is performance or output. So in simple words, if I have to tell you, fecundity is how many children they can have. Fertility is how many children they actually have. Do you see the difference? The capacity versus output. Okay. So as you see here in demography, fertility refers to the actual birth performance of a group of women. Talking about as a population, a group of women. So we don't normally study individuals here, but an average. So group of women, or to the relative frequency with which the birth occurs in total population or in the population exposed to it. So basically, fertility rate gives us an idea about, for a given size of women in a given population, how many children are born. So you get a picture for so many women, 100 for 100 women, for example, 2.5 children, 3.5 children, 4 children, or 400 children, let's say, are born. So fertility gives us an idea about the growth of a population. Okay, and of course, fertility is because of fecundity. Okay, right. So we'll discuss later about how fecundity differs from fertility, but for now, I hope this is clear to you that fecundity is the ability, fertility is the performance or output. Right. So let's learn about the relationship between menarche and the fertility process. So what is menarche? Because menarche and menopause are the two key events of fertility process. Because imagine a women, I think we talked about in unit 10 as well. So at certain stage after puberty, you notice that women actually have certain changes in their body, which are seen in the form of secondary sexual characteristics, and then their reproductive life begins there. Their body prepares to, have or help release ovum or eggs in the women, and then thereby you can specifically see that those eggs are which are released can undergo fertilization when joined with sperms, and then resulting in zygotes, and zygote goes through the embryonic stages, etc. But what happens during this period? Because in growth we mostly talked about stages, but here in this key part that we are focusing on, what happens during that stage where eggs are released and fertilization is taking place, what type of processes have to take place in the women. Okay, and does it continue forever? If not, what age do they normally have this process being ceased? Okay, what is the difference between this menarche process and how do you call the process where the cessation of the conception process actually happens? So we are going to learn those concepts. So first and foremost, as I was still at puberty, one of the significant process which is even culturally celebrated in many cultures is menarche. So what does menarche mean? Menarche is the first or beginning of menstruation process. So menarche refers to the event of occurrence of first menstruation. Okay, I'll briefly tell you what does it mean. So it is occurrence of menstruation. So this is a sign that fertility had begun for that woman's life. So this is an onset of fertility, which is seen as a process of beginning of menstruation process. So this can be considered as the marker for sexual maturity. So this indicates that physiologically body has prepared. The sexual maturity is attained, or at least in the process of attaining, to have children, to bear children. Okay, so this is a marker that is seen in young females. In many cultures, this is actually celebrated because this is an essential part. Doesn't matter, not just humans. This is true with any living system that being able to give rise to new children and new growth in that population is considered to be the sign of success for any given species, the bacteria to humans. So definitely this results in a sign that women is matured, is ready to actually bear children. And menarche actually occurs suddenly and distinctly, as opposed to the next process that we talk about for menopause. Menarche is a sudden and distinct process. It suddenly happens. Of course, a lot of preparation goes in women's body for that, and therefore it is a main indicator of female fertility. But this is a sudden onset that happens with respect to menstruation. That is more visible. Okay. So as I was telling you, menarche is, if you see the process of menarche, and what are the different changes that happen during the menarche process. So let's learn a little bit about it, because short notes are normally asked on these type of topics. So know enough about, for 10 marker answer to be written for menarche and also for menopause, or both together if you have to explain it. These are the two key events that are seen in connection with the fertility of women. Okay. Why don't we talk much about this in men? Men don't have any specific such stages for them. They also undergo puberty and certain changes, secondary sexual characteristics are expressed in them as well. But otherwise, they have a more long-term reproduction phase compared to the women. So in a way, you notice that later women are limiting factor for them because there are certain restrictions. Their body is designed like that. So let's look at the menarche process for women and of course menopause. So mostly our focus is on women here because of that reason. Okay, let's see what are the specific steps or stages or process that take place under this. So menarche is a culmination of series of physiological and anatomic processes of puberty. So although it suddenly happens, a distinct change you may notice here, but there is a lot that goes behind this process. So in a way, you can see it as culmination or end of such series of physiological and anatomical processes that take place at the puberty time. Okay, certain things that you notice here is attainment of sufficient body mass. Studies normally say that when typically about 17% of the body fat when attained, it leads to the process of menarche. So certain requirements for carrying body fat is there. Okay, there's a direct correlation between body fat and menarche, time of menarche. Then secretion of estrogen by the ovaries in response to pituitary hormones. As part of this, what happens? Pituitary gland, the master gland of all hormones present in the brain, it sends signals to ovaries to produce estrogen. So how this is how brain sitting here controls various parts in the body and various processes in the body. So similarly here, pituitary hormones regulate the estrogen production. And what does estrogen do? So ovaries produce the estrogen. Ovaries are the key reproductive organs of women. So those ovaries, what do? They release estrogen, one of the hormones. Several other hormones are there, but estrogen is the key hormone. And over an interval about 2 to 3 years. So once this process begins, okay, for about 2 to 3 years, estrogen stimulate the growth of uterus. So it directly acts on the uterus part, thereby defining its height, or thereby defining the height, breast growth. So in the women, height, breast growth, and widening of the pelvic region. Again, preparation towards carrying the child and delivering the child. So widening of the pelvic region, and also increased adipose tissue at specific sites or regional sites. We talked about this in fat distribution in 9.6 in the markers, how this differs. So fat being very, very important component because it is a precursor for certain hormones like estrogen. Okay. So these type of changes normally happen through release of hormone called estrogen, which helps the changes that happen in uterus as well as other changes that happen, especially secondary sexual development that happen in women. Okay, so this is what you notice in the process here. So normally, if you have noticed this from your high school, so these are the ovaries, two ovaries, and there is a fallopian tube connected to the ovaries, or tube connected to the ovaries, right? They open into uterus. This part is uterus part. So what happens here? Eggs at every month, approximately they have 28-day cycle. So in that 28-day cycle, we notice that eggs are released in about after about second week, 13th they normally say, eggs get matured. They undergo cell division. They're gametes, right? As we talked about in mitosis and meiosis, especially in meiosis, they undergo cell division, result in the gametes like this. And these gametes, okay, eggs, so they have to undergo certain maturation process after finishing cell division, and then ovulation takes place. Ovulation means release of these eggs. So like that, eggs that are released will move through the fallopian tube. This is where sperm has to reach for fertilization process, where zygote gets formed. Okay, but normally you see in the female reproductive system, although there are two ovaries in each cycle, in general, one egg gets released per cycle. Okay, only rarely you may notice two eggs being released, so one from each ovary, thereby resulting in identical twin concept. Okay, otherwise what happens, egg matures here, egg gets released here in a process called ovulation, and then in the process you also notice that estrogen, because not only egg release, estrogen is also released by or secreted by these ovaries, and which stimulates the vascularity of endometrium. Sorry, endometrium. Endometrium is the inner lining of the uterus. Endometrium is the inner lining of the uterus. As you notice here, a difference between these two images, thickening of that region takes place. So this endometrium becomes thick. When it becomes thick, when endometrium becomes thick, so what happens? Okay, it is preparing towards carrying the baby in that. So every time female body prepares in every cycle, it prepares towards carrying the baby. Okay, but fluctuations of hormone levels changes in blood supply to the parts of the endometrium. But hormones are very sensitive to various aspects like fertilization process as well. So if it happens, blood supply can fluctuate, thereby affecting the growth of endometrium. Okay, so death of some of the endometrial tissue from this hormone or blood supply. So because of these fluctuations in the hormonal blood supply, eventually, if no fertilization takes place, then there is no need to have this thick wall being built for carrying the baby. Instead, what happens? The blood supply gets fluctuated, hormones gets fluctuated, thereby endometrial layer dies. Thereby, it leads to deciduation or basically death of that tissue. And then this leads to the menstruation process. So menstruation is nothing but the egg that is produced and also this endometrial layer that is formed or thickened here, all together little bit of blood, little an egg, and as well as endometrial layer will be shed. So this takes for about 3 to 4 days period. That is the end of the cycle. So what happens, that endometrial layer along with the egg is shed. So this is what normally happens in the menarche process. And again, the cycle goes back. Again, egg undergoes cell divisions, maturation happens, release of egg happens. And then if no fertilization, again, it goes back to the menstruation process. Like that, this is an ongoing process. This is briefly how menarche normally happen and what process take place. And when does menarche begin? When does this process begin? What is the average age? And do you see any pattern of these? Or either if you see the differentials or patterns in globally related to the menarche. Let's have a look at that. Okay, menarche. Age at menarche. What is an average age of menarche? Over the last several decades, the average age of menarche has shown a significant decline, meaning the age of menarche seems to be decreasing over decades of time, meaning it is becoming more earlier than usual. Okay, there is a decreasing trend in onset of menarche, global trend. For instance, a study conducted on evolutionary medicine showed that average age of menarche is decreased by 4 years. Average age of menarche decreased by about 4 years in the modern western part of the world in last 150 years. And about 150 years of data shows that an average 4 years decrease in menarche age, early menarche. is being noticed. Another study demonstrated similar trends in the menarchal age in some developing nations as well. Same trend is also noticed in the developing countries. In Europe, the average menarchal age showed a 4-year drastic decline from 17 to 13 years. So what is that age? What is that number? 17 used to be common, 17 years to begin to have the menarche, and that now became 13 years and a half. Okay, from 17 years, it came down to 13 years. Comparable trends to the data mentioned above can be observed in the United States as well. So West, US, and developing nations showing this trend. So this seems to be an average trend happening in evolution. An old study from 1976, this image I've taken from, they have done some study on people from Finland, Poland, Romania, and India, especially from Madras and South Africa, Bantu populations from South Africa. Okay, so what do you notice here? Age of menarche. Age of menarche. So we're talking about 12 to 15 years here. The average range that we're talking about. So in Finland, it is a bit narrower here, and in Poland, 13 to 14 years, and in Romania, slightly above 13 to 14 years. India, Madras has also more broad scope here, more broad range here. Sorry, so about 12.7, 12.8 to 14.2, etc. South Africa also after about 13.2 something to 15 years of age. And again, there seems to be more urban and rural. Slight differences can be seen here. So more to the urban side, it is happening earlier. More in the rural side, it is happening late. So this difference can also be noticed. Also, more latest study, of course, over a decade-old study, also clearly indicates that the mean menarche age is about 13.6 years. So mean age of menarche is about 13.6 years. Okay. So Delhi and Delhi and Chennai also they conducted surveys on this. So it shows that menarche age is about 13.6 years. So if you see in this graph, they're talking about number of people they noticed here. Okay, and what do you see here? 13 years. It seems to be where the peak is. Okay, 13 years. But it can go from anywhere from 10 years, beginning at 10 years to 17 years also it can happen. There is a range, but majority of the cases it is happening at the age of 30 approximately. Right. But what factors are associated with that, or what factors are defining the menarche? Okay, some factors. There are many indications. I don't think many of them could not be proved. But if you look into the literature and the research related to the factors affecting menarche age, so these are the factors that I have listed here. The increased incident of childhood obesity. Obesity, having more fat content in the body, seems to positively influence it. Okay, people who tend to be more obese have earlier menarche. Both estrogen and progesterone molecules are derived from cholesterol. The hormones we are talking about, especially estrogen, which is important in the menarche process. Okay, this production of this actually happens because of the cholesterol level of the body. Obesity can correlate to this factor. Next, high conflict family relationship, more stress related families, more stressed environments. Stress can also, people with stress can also put on more weight, hormonal imbalances. So like that, high conflict families also tend to have children who show menarche early. Low birth weight. Children who are born with less birth weight, low birth weight, children also tend to have early menarche. And children who are not breastfed can also have early menarche. And children who are exposed to smoking in their environment can also have early menarche. Lacked exercise in childhood, never related to the obesity or fat accumulation. People who are not physically active can also have early menarche. And absence of, this is interesting, very difficult to correlate, but I have verified that from literature as well. Absence of father from the home from early childhood. In high income families, absence of father from the home from early childhood can also result in this. So what is the connection? So it may be more stressful. Okay, if father is not present, if mother is taking care of everything, I think the life is maybe a bit more stressful. Maybe that stress factor adds to it. People also talked about some other theories where if biological father is not there, maybe other males are there. Western countries, it may happen that pheromones, certain sex hormones from other people may influence the developments that happen in the puberty in women could be the reason, but studies I think ruled out that possibility. So it may be stress that happens because of absence of FAR. So these are some factors that lead to the early menarche process. Okay, this is briefly about the menarche. What did we learn in menarche? Menarche, we first of all talked about what is menarche. Okay, and we discussed about the processes behind menarche. Okay, the overall process during the menstruation process. And then we talked about what age does menarche take place. We said it used to be 17, but it got down to 13. This trend more or less seen in many countries around the globe. And I've pointed out that few studies, an old study and a newer study, indicating that 13 is an average age approximately. So there is a range for it if you see within India and also in other countries. And what define or influences early age of menarche, I also talked about factors. Right, I think this is more than enough for you to describe about the menarche role related to fertility and also specific aspects of menarche. So short note, if you're asked to write about on menarche, you can definitely describe this. Right, next we'll move on to menopause part. So what is menopause? If menarche is the beginning, menopause is the end. Okay, so menopause is the last menstrual period of women, is the menopause. So pause means stop, cessation that happens with respect to the menstruation process. So in a way that is considered to be the end of the fertility period of the woman's life. Correct? So the both menarche and menopause are connected like that. Menarche is the beginning, menopause is the end of fertility. So together they define the age, the region where women can have children. Okay, let's first figure out what is the average age of menopause and then you can calculate that range. Okay, menopause is a normal part of life. This is not something abnormal. This is a very common and integral part of women's life. And this menopause, unlike the menarche process, menopause is a long process. Menarche, as I was talking to you briefly, that it distinctly happens at one point of time with certain physiological changes taking place before. But menopause can be really felt by women. And it goes for about 4 to 8 years, even 10 years. So this is a process that troubles women for about 4 to 8 years. So about 5 years for sure. So when does that begin? This process of menopause and the related events begin at the age of approximately 45. Slight change, 45 to 55 plus or minus 5. So it may go from 40 to 50, 45 to 55 or somewhere in between. But yes, after 40 years of age and about 45 years to 55 years of age so the menopause process begins, and normally menopause is attained at the age of 49, approximately an average just before 50. And it is one step in a long process of reproductive age. So it's only one event. That's a long process. I'll tell you those process and steps there. And what leads to menopause? So menopause can be natural process, but sometimes surgeries can also initiate the process of menopause. For example, removal of someone's uterus, which is called hysterectomy. Nowadays, it's becoming so common in our communities that uterus removal had become common because of several vulnerabilities. Uterine cancer, for example, or excessive bleeding that happens in women. Because of these reasons, because of these complications, hysterectomy had become so common. Okay, how natural, how suggestible is a different question, but it is happening. Okay, this should make the period stop. So it would actually force the person to get into menopause when uterus is removed. When both ovaries are removed as well. It is known as oophorectomy or ovary removal can also because no estrogens, so no hormones, so menstruation cannot be maintained here. So menopause symptoms would start. It doesn't matter at what age this happens, but menopause can be. Like the menopause either can happen naturally or because of certain events like this. Okay, so there are two types of menopause that you sometimes hear are related to menopause here or menstruation ceasing you may hear. One is called primary amenorrhea. Just be familiar about this term. Primary amenorrhea means absence of menstruation. Amenorrhea, no bleeding basically, no menstruation or absence of menstruation. So this can happen before the beginning of the menstruation process. At the age of 13 years, no visible secondary sexual characteristics. So no bleeding. So basically no amenorrhea it is called. At the age of 15, also when it's supposed to be, normal secondary sexual characteristics are there, but no menstruation. That is also called primary initial amenorrhea. Next, secondary amenorrhea. So what is secondary amenorrhea? A woman who had menstruation, but she didn't have menstruation for some time in between. Okay, for about 3 normal menstrual cycles or 6 months. If such things are missing, then it is secondary amenorrhea, which you normally notice during the childbirth. So during the childbirth, no menstruation process takes place because there is no need for body to produce eggs. So body would recognize through hormonal changes, and then what happens? It would cease to produce the hormones, especially and the balance of hormones, not exactly complete hormones, but the balance of the hormones are maintained in such a way that there is no need for menstruation and egg release, but there is a need for maintaining the pregnancy. That is where hormonal balance plays a very important role. So we'll briefly talk about this in unit 12, that estrogen level slightly decreases, progesterone level increases. So these balance between these two hormones define whether it is menstruation or egg release process or maintenance of pregnancy is needed. So progesterone is a hormone responsible for maintaining pregnancy, though, so its concentration increases in the body. Right. So this briefly about primary and secondary amenorrhea. Okay, mean age. What is the mean age of menopause? I think I briefly talked about the average age, 45 to 55. So South Korean women shows about 47, 46.9, plus or minus 5. Vietnamese or Viennese women, they actually show 49.2 plus or minus 4 or 3.6. So 46.7 or 46.5 for Mexico. Different cities, but approximately the same for us, no difference here. So 46.5 plus or minus 5. And the black women in South Africa, rural and urban areas, approximately 49 years plus or minus 5. So an average, it is more or less the lowest you see is 46 and highest you notice is 48 to 49, of course. Not considering the standard deviation. Standard deviation indicate that 49 plus 4 means 53 years. An average menopause for Indian women is seen to be happening at 46.2. So much earlier, much lower than this, plus or minus 5, approximately 45 to 50 years of age, or 40 to 50 years of age, as per 2016 data. So what is the reproductive span of women then? Counted. So 13 is the average menopause age, 46 is the end. So 13 and 46. 13 and 46. Okay. So 33 years approximately, over 30 years, 33 years of reproductive span that they can have children. Okay, we'll talk more about this a little later. So processes that happen in menopause. Okay, again hormonal changes here. So menarche we talked about as first menstrual period. Before menopause take place, we notice that what is called pre-menopause. What type of feelings or what type of features that you normally notice during the menopause period? Okay, so increasing irregularity and frequency of the flow rate of menstrual cycle. Bleeding that happens, the irregularity, it may not happen for about the 28 days period, may happen in 15 days, later, earlier, lot of fluctuations can be seen. Not only the frequency, but also the flow rate would also change. This indicates that someone is reaching the menopause stage. And then starts what is called perimenopause. Perimenopause is onset of some specific symptoms. Like these women at this stage experiences hot flushes. They experience mood swings are very, very common. Anxiety and dryness in vagina, nighttime sweats, and tenderness in breast. Insomnia, fatigue are some of the common symptoms that menopause women experience. Very, very difficult for women to actually go through this life. And of course, in cultural societies like India, where we don't have too much of interaction between men and women related to this. So men don't realize that women actually struggling for about a decade with these problems. We only tend to complain, but our mothers, when they are experiencing too much of mood swings, suddenly they get angry. We cannot tolerate that. right? This is happening because there are physiological changes in their body, preparing their body towards menopause. It is a time where I think those women require a lot of attention, support from the family. But unfortunately, we don't know as men, we don't realize, we don't understand what they go through. So this is very important aspect of biological component that we all need to be aware of. And eventually, as this goes for about 5-6 years and above, and then finally last menstrual period happens, and they reach what is called menopause. Post menopause also they do have problems that they experience, like most of the symptoms that I talked about do happen here. Okay, but normally these would decrease. Some people may experience it for a little bit of a time, but usually after menopause this should cease. Okay, some of them like vaginal dryness and few of these things may remain, otherwise stops there. And problem here with the menopause, women are actually become more and more prone to certain problems because estrogen levels decrease in them. All these are happening because, again, hormonal imbalances or hormonal changes. So when hormonal decrease, like estrogen decreases, calcium absorption also decreases. So women after menopause are more and more prone to osteoporosis. So women life is more sensitive. As you see, in the menstruation process, they lose enough blood, which is a very important component of the body. Iron loss normally happens. They have usually problems in maintaining energy. Similarly, they may have weak bones after menopause, and even they are prone to heart problems. So, like that, these hormonal changes put them at slight amount of risk towards certain diseases. Okay, now you may ask a question: why menopause? Look at many other organisms. Now, of course, they do have. I think most of the animals, if you notice, the lifespan, general lifespan, more or less correlates with the reproductive lifespan. But humans are the species where we have about 15 years before we attain at maturity, and only for about another 35 years or so, okay, you notice that period. After that, after reproduction stops, or after that ability to give birth to children stops, we still live for about few decades again, which is very unusual in other species. Why? Because they have maximum amount of reproductive lifespan and that's it. But we actually have a longer life, or at least significant life even after the reproductive span. Why is that? So why did menopause evolve in humans? Okay, limits ovulation of abnormal oocytes. We talked about in Down syndrome, aged women, for example, tend to have more abnormalities in their eggs. So the ovulation abnormalities that we normally notice to limit that, because as they age, more and more less fit individuals may be born. Next, younger mothers tolerate pregnancy, birth, and childcare stress better. Also, it is a very traumatic event for women. If they when they go through this process, they may be able to tolerate it when they are young, but not when they are actually too old. Okay, so that is why I think it happens earlier and ceases at maybe better. Higher risk of death in older mother and thus risk for older child. So higher risk of death in older mother. Similarly, as older mothers, if they have to get into this pregnancy and the delivery process, they may not survive it very well. Okay, so there is a risk to their children, also to their older children. So in evolutionary perspective, if you notice, maybe having that point being seized earlier enough makes sense. Also, to explain this, there is something called the grandmother hypothesis. To explain this, why menopause happens, what is the benefit to humans of menopause? For this, there's a theory called grandmother hypothesis from Physical Anthropology book by Stein and Grove. They briefly explain the concept of grandmother hypothesis here. It is the idea that the presence of a postmenopausal female in human groups increases the survival rate of children and grandchildren. So, what is the benefit of having a grandparent, grandmother, when her the grandmother's child, meaning a person's mother, when she is in the stage of having a child, if there is an additional support in the family, there is a higher survival of the grandchild. So, because a woman who doesn't have to take care of her own child, who can dedicate her time to take care of her grandchildren, improves the survival rate of the children. So, in evolutionary perspective, it is not just having more children, but even able to have those who are surviving is important. So, having grandmother who is not having her own children but can dedicate a time for taking care of the grandchild can improve that chance. So that is the theory behind grandmother hypothesis. So grandmother, this menopause probably is introduced to have more success rate in having children, and survival rate of the children increases. That is the concept of grandmother hypothesis. There are many variations that are there for grandmother hypothesis. You don't need to know, but in people have explained it differently in the literature. So this is one I would like to tell you here briefly. I've already explained the concept here. Mother offspring provisioning enabled by grandmothers. It creates a novel fitness opportunity for older females whose own fertility is declining with the age. If the older females help feed their just weaned grandchildren, I mean people who are taken from the breast, if they're able to take care of the infant, the mothers of those weanings can have shorter interbirth intervals. So this mother, her child can go for another child. So number of children increases, their survival rate also increases, provided there is someone like a grandmother to take care. The mothers of those weanings can have shorter interbirth intervals between two births without reduction in a offspring survivorship. So both survivorships as well as the reduction in the birth. So more children they can have. The more vigorous elders who have no nursing infants, they don't have to take care of their own children of their own, will thus raise their daughters' reproductive success. So grandmothers are contributing to the daughter's reproductive success. So this is a theory, social context, in evolutionary context, why having that menopause is probably okay. Right now, I would like to briefly talk to you about the difference between fertility and fecundity. I briefly explained you this concept of fertility and fecundity. I showed you the same slide. That fecundity is the biological capacity to have children. Fertility is the how many children they actually have. So fecundity, calculate yourself. I was telling you approximately 33. Let's say 30. If there's a 30 years of lifespan, reproductive lifespan for a given woman, how many children they can have? How many children they can have? Each child definitely requires a 9-month period, correct? There is about 6 months for, at least minimum 6 months for the breastfeeding. So that actually accounts for about 1.3, 1 year, 1 year, 3 months, correct? So 30 divided by 1.3, 30 divided by 1, even approximately if you take 1 year, it is 30. Let's say 27 to 28 children they can have. Have you heard women having 27 to 28 children? No. You might have heard in olden days, I remember my grandmother or great grandmother probably had about 11 children, right? 10, 11 children I heard about, but not 30, right? So fecundity is just a theoretical concept. Fertility is what practically that we know. Practically, how does this number change? It may be as high as was 10, 11, or maybe as low as 1 nowadays. So how fertility has actually changed over a period of time. Okay, this is what you notice. Fertility rate changes over a period of time with age. We're talking about on the x-axis 15 to 19 years, 22, 24, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, etc. So fertility begins with the menarche. So after menarche, I think it requires about 2 years or so for maturation process. And then what happens? Fertility increases. Highest usually between 20 to 25. Depending on the population and the ethnic groups, it may vary. But normally in the second decade or third decade, so 20 years to 30 years of period where it is usually maximum. Then it decreases eventually, and when menopause is hit, like about 45 to 49, it becomes almost zero. That is how fertility decreases over a period of time. Let me give you a few pointers, few key differences between fertility and fecundity. Few differences between fertility and fecundity. So fertility is a childbearing performance, as I told you. Childbearing capacity is fecundity, was defined that. And the second, voluntary biological process. Fertility depends on that woman, what she wants to do, whether she wants to have a children or not. Of course, biologically, genetically, hormonally also there can be difference. But fecundity is almost uniform. It's their genetic capacity, inherent capacity, and more or less uniform. Doesn't matter between populations, between genders, fecundity, childbearing capacity is more or less same. Next, influenced by. Fertility is influenced by various social and biological factors. 11.3, we're going to discuss that in detail in the next class. So influenced by various social, biological factors, like for example, age at marriage, okay, duration of marriage. So at what age does marriage take place? In early marriages, more children. And the duration of marriage, how long they actually are in the relationship like that. Spacing of children, how did they plan the children being spaced? Every 1, 2 years, every 4 years, like that. Child survival rate, how many children are surviving can also influence it. Educational status, economic condition, cultural beliefs, etc. Fecundity of man. So, but fecundity, are there similar responses that you notice with fecundity? Fecundity of man starts at puberty and continues throughout the life. The difference between, because fertility is clear, we already discussed in detail. Fecundity, I think there's a difference that you notice between the males and females. Okay, so let me explain that here. For women, fecundity goes from 0 to non-zero at the onset of menarche. Until menarche, there is no fecundity. Basically, there is no biological capacity. But biological capacity begins with menarche. So this happens at menarche. Then female fecundity generally increases to their mid. As I've shown you, 20-25 years, 20 to 30 years is where it is high, peaks. Okay, and then menopause, it completely stops. This is the trend. What about males? Male fecundity generally drops from, so males after attaining puberty in a similar manner to females, at the age of about 15 years also, they start producing the gametes, sperms. Male fecundity generally drops. So thereby their fecundity is usually high. So 20 to 30 years approximately is high. And it slowly drops later, but there's no ceasing for them. It gradually decreases. Men mid-20s onwards, they age, but does not have a definite end point. So fecundity decreases from about 20-25 years, but doesn't have a definite end point like menopause seen in women. And male fecundity tends to last longer than the female fecundity. That is why they say female is a limiting factor. Their reproductive phase is a limiting factor for having children. That is why in some religions we notice that one male can have multiple wives. So thereby there is no limit in having number of children. One father can, father would about 20-25 children, 30 children. Okay, all right. So I think I was wanted to finish this up. So fecundity is that fecundity can vary between men and women, and these are the factors that normally vary. And you may also see some factors overlap between fertility and fecundity. We're going to talk about in the next class how certain factors would influence fertility, fecundity. Some differences also you may notice there. That we'll discuss later. Okay, considerably reduced by various methods of fertility control. For fertility, how these are controlled? Fertility measures, control measures, like using condoms, for example, and there are different control measures like taking pills, right? So, and family planning like components, what may cease completely. Like that, there are certain steps that are taken to reduce the population. They can reduce the fertility. Fecundity of a couple essentially determined by the fecundity of the female partners. So yeah, of course, genetic hormonal problems in both males and females are possible. Otherwise, mostly females' reproductive life can limit this. Next, increase in interpregnancy intervals reduces fertility. Increase in meaning more space between children reduces fertility. So our actual outcome will decrease because of these reasons. Next, equally fecund women demonstrate variable levels of fertility. So more or less all women, except for some genetic issues or hormonal issues, they're equally fecund. They can have equal number of children, but they show variable levels of fertility. Okay, but fertility would define the fecundity. So fertility is a limiting factor for fecundity. Okay, there may be different factors influencing their fertility as we briefly talked about. Thereby it defines how many children they can actually have. Although they can have about 27, 28 children in their life, usually nobody have so many children. Okay, right. These are some ideas, points between fertility and fecundity I wanted to briefly mention to you. And fertility rates, what is happening to the fertility rates? Yeah, this can come as part of the next part, fertility patterns and differentials. You can see it as part of Okay, I would like to briefly tell you a little bit about this. So based on the current trends, it is assumed that human fertility rates will continue to decline. There is a decreasing trend in terms of fertility rates. And life expectancy will increase. Fertility rate will decrease. Life expectancy will increase. Developing countries are expected to broadly follow these demographic trends. Okay, especially developing countries also witness this. You notice here, talking about 1950 to 2050. Some prediction is happening here, 1950 onwards to the 2050. So these areas, I think the study happened before 2010 or about 2005. So they projected these. So, but definitely you can see the decreasing trend. Africa, developing country, underdeveloped country, you notice that there's a declining trend. Asia, you can also notice that. South Central America, you can notice that. Developed countries also, they have less steep curve. You also notice in that. From where child born per woman. So basically fertility rate, you can say, so 6 or 7 per person per woman, they can have anywhere up to 6.5 children. To it came down to about 2 or slightly more than that. So there's a decreasing trend in having the children, or the fertility rate is decreasing. So this is one pattern you notice. The next one I would like to point out here is, as per the studies that are revealed in 2015 related to the world population prospects, the total fertility rate, okay, in overall fertility rate in the world is 2.5 children per woman. So global fertility rate is how much? 2.5 per children. Sorry, per woman. 2.5 children per women. So meaning every two can have 5 children. Still high enough, right? Africa remains the region with the highest fertility at 4.7 children per woman. The highest is approximately 5 per woman in Africa. So we are seeing the differentials, fertility differentials, differences in fertility at the various places in the world. Europe has the lowest fertility with 1.6 children per woman. So meaning every two women can have only 3 children here, or are having 3 children here, whereas in Africa, 2 women are having 10 children. Look at the difference. Whereas in Asia and as well as Latin America and even the Caribbean islands, total fertility rate is slightly high, 2.2 children per woman. So these are some differentials in fertility rates. And you notice in this particular study, okay, which had pointed out how this trend is changing. So kind of more broad analysis on what we've already seen. 1970 to 75, the global average children per woman was 4.5. 1970 to 7.5. So this blue line, if you see it, so there were even about 8, that above 8 as per the study that you can see here, but it kept decreasing. And different countries were at different stages. Rwanda was here, Nigeria was here, Iran, Egypt, India, okay, China, Brazil. So India had about less than 6 per woman. China had about 5.5 per woman, or 5 per woman approximately, like that. And developed countries like USA, Germany, Russia, France, they are here. And then 1990 to 1995, what happens? The global average went from 4.5 to 3. And India went from here, about 5.5 to, India came to 4, approximately 4. Okay, this is decreasing trend can be seen for majority of the countries. And 2010 to 2015 time, 2010 to 2015 time, that is this red line, it further decreased to from 3 to 2.5. More or less twofold decrease in fertility rates. Okay, then finally, I think they're predicting from 2025 to 2030, the global average will come down to 2.4. So 2.2 to 2.4 seems to be the norm as an average. Okay, developed countries will have slight less, about 1.5, okay, or even close to 1. China, approximately 1 per woman now. And some countries may have, even if you pick up this point, I think about 6.5. It's probably possible. Okay. Also, within India, if you notice, there are certain states that show decreased rates related to that. Total fertility rates are also decreasing in some states, especially if you notice EAG states. EAG states refer to empowered action group states. Empowered action group states, they are called, or EAG states they are known as. So here, so these are socio-economically backward states. What type of, or what kind of states these are? These are socio-economically backward states, which include Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh or MP, Odisha, Rajasthan, Uttarakhand, UP, and Assam. So what do you notice here? Okay, so let's pick up one example here, maybe Bihar. So Bihar 2005 about 4.3, but in the end of 2010 it came down to 3.7. Overall, if you see the slope, you see the decreasing trend even for the empowered action group states, which are more economically backward states. So even within them, if you go to Kerala, if you go to other states, which have economically better, doing better, you will see more steep curve in decrease in their total fertility rate. So this trend not only holds true for overall countries in the world, but also several states in India. Okay, right. Age-specific fertility rate is also decreasing. Age-specific numbers, if you have to look at it, and we have a data for India here. So in India, the births per 1,000 women is usually high between 20 to 24 years of age. This is where it peaks. I think we briefly talked about it. Some other countries like Libya, this number is somewhere else. Okay, so 30, 34 years where they have usually higher number. There are several factors are there, but usually I think in India we notice that this higher fertility can be seen at the age of 20 to 24 years, approximately 20 years is where you notice. Okay, right. So with that, we finished talking about the menarche, menopause, bio events related to the two key bio events related to the fertility. These are the most important ones. The remaining things, the preparation towards reproductive life happens before menarche, and between menarche and menopause, normal reproduction cycle takes place here. Okay, these are the key bio events, mainly regulated by genetic components, our genes, and also hormones. Some environmental factors like exposure to smoking, those type of things I told you in the menarche, can also make the difference here. We also discussed about the patterns and differentials related to fertility, various statistics that we have seen, how the pattern is and the differences among various countries, states, we basically seen. Okay, with that we finished talking about 11.1. And in the next class, I'm going to focus on biological and socio-ecological factors. Okay, different factors influencing fertility, fecundity, natality, mortality, we are going to focus on. Plus, towards the end, I'm going to talk to you briefly about the demographic theories. Okay, various demographic theories that we are going to focus on. Okay, right.